Today I'm going to show you how to create this procedural cracked mud texture with stones randomly placed around. This one gave me a lot of trouble actually, probably 3 or 4 weeks of poking around and working on this thing until I finally had a good result I was happy with. So I'll show you why it took me so long to make, and I'll show you how I eventually did it. To start off, let's get rid of our cube and bring in a plane. I'm going to change this entire middle area to my shader editor and hit N to get rid of that shelf, and just select this material that was on our default cube. I'm going to come to the top right and change this to my 3D viewport and scroll across. Just turn off these overlays so we can see things and zoom in. Hold down Z and move your mouse up. We'll be in rendered mode. I'm going to bring in a Voronoi node and just place it here. Let's see what this looks like. This is going to be the basis for our texture, our cracked mud texture. I'm going to hit Control T while that's highlighted, and that's a Node Wrangler shortcut. So you need Node Wrangler enabled to do that. And make sure this is coming out of Object. The pattern's going to be a little smaller. Then I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it right here, and then an RGB curves node, and just place it right afterwards. And the RGB curves node is especially helpful. You can tweak these around and make quite a cool variety of shapes with just kind of moving these around and just experimenting. I'm going to reset this for now, but it's just nice to have that option. The next step is to plug all of this into a displacement node. I'm just going to move this principled BSDF out of the way for a second. And let's bring in that displacement node and place it right after here. And we're going to want to plug this into height rather than into normal. And so then we've got to do a couple things to set this up here. First of all, we've got to change the render engine from Eevee to cycles. Let's change the feature set to experimental. And if you have a GPU compute option under your device, change to that. It'll probably be a little faster. Then let's come down here to the material properties and go to settings, and we're going to change displacement under settings from bump only to displacement and bump. Next, let's go to the modifiers panel and let's select a subdivision surface modifier and make sure adaptive subdivision is here. If you don't have that option, you probably didn't change it to experimental on this render settings tab here. So adaptive subdivision, let's make sure we click simple as well. But adaptive subdivision, what it does is it makes it so that things that are closer to the camera get subdivided more, and things further away get subdivided less. So if I'm doing a scene and I try the subdivision surface with a normal setup here, and I'm like turning it up to 6 or 7, and it's still not looking very good, adaptive subdivision is probably going to work better for you. And you can turn this up or down to increase the detail as well. Let's plug the displacement right into the displacement on the material output. We can see the effect is quite strong, so let's lower this scale. Let's change it to 0.1, and that's looking a little bit better. Let's take a look at this principled BSDF here. We can see our cracked mud, pattern coming through. Why don't I turn this down one more? It's still looking a little high. Instead of 0.1, let's go like 0.05. That's looking much better. So the first thing you might notice is that these individual separations here, they're cracks, but they're kind of the highest point here. So we probably want to make them lower so that it looks like, cracked mud, how it contracts and breaks apart in an interesting pattern. So to do that, what I thought is, why don't I take this Voronoi and just duplicate this with Control-Shift-D so it stays attached to that mapping node. And let's change this to distance to edge. And let's look at that. We get these black lines in the middle there. And so I'm going to take this color ramp and just move this white way down so that it makes those black lines basically kind of skinny, and that white gradient goes away. So I move that white down to 0.02. And then let's go ahead and mix that with this Voronoi down here. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit here, and then just Control-Shift, right-click, drag between these two nodes. We get this mix right here. Then I'm going to change this to multiply and change the factor to 1, just like that. Then let's plug this into the factor on that color ramp. Let's view this principled BSDF again here. Now we've got those cracks in the middle and the low points, so it's already looking a little bit more like cracked mud with that adjustment. The next thing I wanted to do is break up the uniformity of these straight lines, add a little bit of squiggliness in there. So I figured the best way to do that was to bring in a noise texture and just put it upstream of this mapping node. You can see the effect is quite extreme, so I'm going to bring in a mix RGB here and plug object into color 2. And now this factor on the mix is essentially a controller that controls how much influence this noise texture has. So if I move it all the way to the right, you can see it's like this noise texture isn't even here. And if I move it all the way to the left, it's like this mix isn't even here. You know, it just goes straight in. So if I move this to something higher, I think 0.93, that'll be pretty good. I'm going to lower this scale to 7. And then let's go ahead and add 2 more of these for an extra level here. I'm going to set it up like this here and plug object into color 2 there. I'm going to change this scale to something much higher, 80, and I'm going to change this factor to 0.98. It's already looking a lot better there. Now that we've got the rough shape of the mud figured out, I'm going to come to this RGB curves node right before the displacement and just put a single point. I found I had pretty good results with something like this. I thought it made the mud shaped a little bit more like a bowl and kind of got rid of that little flat spot at the bottom. You can do whatever you want, but I had good results with this. Let's set up a simple color for the mud. I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it right here, place another one right here as well. Run that into the factor and then run this color into the base color there. Then let's bring in a noise texture and just plug it into this first color ramp right here. Let's change this scale to 10. I'm going to split my window here so that I can open up the the image editor. And then I've got this little window here open with some mud textures. I'm just going to choose one of them. You can use whatever, but let's take a look at this guy here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And over this second color ramp, hover over this here, hit E, and then we can drag our tool across here, and it gives us just kind of an assortment of different colors there. I'm going to do that again, make it a little simpler. Yeah, something like that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Let's grab here and just close this window again, just so we clear that up. And I think the roughness is a little low. Why don't we just set this at like 0.7? That's good for now. We can change it if we want, but I like the look of that. Now what I want to start thinking about is having some rocks appear randomly throughout this mud landscape we've got going on. So I'm going to bring in another Voronoi, place it right here, hit Control T, and make sure this is coming out of object again, just like before. We can move these over a little bit. Let's take a look at this guy here. You know, it's the same Voronoi we had at the beginning. And what we're going to do is just run this through a color ramp, just like this. Let's set the first one, the black, let's bring it up a little bit. And let's bring the white quite far down. Something like this here. So now you can see these random assortment of shapes just kind of popping up here, these circles. And those are going to be our rocks. Let's set this bottom one at 0.14. This top one, we'll set it at 0.57. So to displace this out, let's run this through another color ramp, and I'm just going to reset it and then flip it around because we want the white areas, those are going to be our rocks, so we want those to stick out. So if they're black, you know, they're going to be going the wrong way. I'm going to bring this black down quite far so we don't have so many rocks, especially the ones that are all overlapping there. Let's set this at 0.32, just like that. And then we want to think about how we're going to add this to the other displacement map. Basically, we want this displacement to come last. So we want to add this to this guy right here. So let's go ahead and try that out, just using a mix RGB. Let's place that right here, and run this one into this guy here. And now that's all running into the displacement. Let's take a look at our sand again. So we can see it's kind of working there. We've got these lumps coming out. You know, this one's kind of flat on the top. You know, maybe we can do something about that. But we've got mixed displacement. Another thing too, these cracks are running right through our rocks, and that's not something we want. It looks a little weird. You know, we want the cracks to not appear where those rocks are. To give us a little bit more control of the shape of the rocks, let's bring in another RGB curves node and just place it right here. Maybe we can get rid of that flat top by adjusting these guys a little bit here. I'm going to bring this one point down here, this point up here a little bit. I'm going to bring this last point down a little bit here. Whoops, I didn't grab that one right. Get rid of that and just grab this guy here. I'm going to zoom in and grab this guy here, bring it down a little bit. And yeah, it looked like it got rid of the flat tops for those rocks. You know, you could always keep adjusting it there, but I'm satisfied with that adjustment. Let's come over here to this color ramp and let's Control-Shift-D that guy. This is going to be our mask for the color separation. So this guy here is the color for our sand, and let's duplicate this mix RGB and just mix these together with Control Shift right click drag. And that just gives us this mix shader here, and I'm actually just going to bring this up here so it's a little easier to look at, just like that. So this is going to be our rock here. We won't set up the color just yet, but we want to plug that mask into this mix shader right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Just plug that right in there. We can see our separation is working. We've got the rocks are, the gray color there that we haven't really set up, and the sand or the mud is this brown color there. Let's also bring this up here to 0.22 just to make that mask a little sharper. To make it so that these cracks aren't running through the middle here, I'm going to Control Shift D this middle color ramp again so I can create a mask. I'm going to duplicate this mix RGB and just place it upstream of itself and run this new color ramp I just created into the factor on that mix. Now we can see, we can kind of adjust these here to, change the shape slightly, but those cracks should not be going through anymore. But we have one more problem here that really, plagued me for a while. We see somewhere, some places we've got these bumps, but no gray. And then other places we've got gray, but no bumps. So I was like going through all my steps here trying to figure out why that's not working for the mask, and then it finally hit me. So I'm just going to demonstrate something with this Voronoi texture here. Let's just check out just this Voronoi texture and turn off this displacement for a second. I'm going to turn on these overlays again so you can see what's going on a bit better. And let's come over here to this Voronoi that we're looking at. We can see it's set to 3D. So if I tab into edit mode and I grab this and move it up and down the Z axis, you can see depending on where I move it, the pattern changes. So that's kind of what's going on here. While we're displacing this along the Z axis, the pattern's changing and my masks aren't where they should be. So if I change this to 2D instead and then grab this, move along the Z axis, the pattern remains the same no matter where it is. So that was my solution. It made a lot of sense to me once I thought of it, so hopefully that was the right thing to do, but it seemed to work. So I'm going to change all three of these Voronois I've got set up so far to 2D instead. Let's look again at this shader and turn on our displacement. So there we go. We've got our rocks. There's a lot of them, so we're going to have to change something else here, mask out a few of them. But now they're all being masked out properly. And changing those to 2D as well actually made it so that those squiggly bits were gone too, which is nice because those were kind of bugging me. So to mask out these rocks, let's duplicate this Voronoi with Control Shift D so it stays attached to that mapping node. Let's come over here to the settings. Let's change this to, let's just change it to 2, something like that. So we're going to mix these two together before they get to this guy here. And you can see once I did that, it kind of created something interesting already, which is, large and small rocks. But I'm going to just enlarge this and actually plug this top one into that factor and this bottom one into color 1. So we can see it's starting to mask it out already, but I'm going to add a color ramp right before that mix after that top Voronoi. And just change this black to, actually we're going to leave that at 0. We're going to change the white to 0.4, just like that. So you can see very few rocks, a little bit more realistic. If you want more rocks to be on your pattern, you could adjust this white a little bit, pull it up to like 0.6 or something like that. But I just liked the value at 0.4. Let's create a little variation for these rock shapes, and let's bring in a noise texture. Just place it before this mapping node. So then I'm going to bring in a mix RGB just like normal and plug the object into color 2 there. Let's change this to 0.83. Oops. Change this factor to 0.83, and then this scale right here, we'll set it, we'll just leave it at 5 actually. Let's duplicate both of these guys here. Just plug this here, plug this here. I'm going to do something slightly different here. Just plug object into color 2 and then run this into color 2 of that second mix. I could have just, run this over here like I did for that other one, but it's just two different ways of setting it up. It just makes it so that this has a bit more influence from this first texture. I'm going to set this at 0.97 and set this scale here. Let's set this at 60, just like that. If we zoom in, we can see a bit more interesting shapes for our rocks. Let's set up a color for these rocks as well. Let's bring in a color ramp and bring in a noise texture as well. Just plug that in here. I'll just use the color. I'm going to duplicate that as well. Just plug that into the first one, just into the vector. And then what I'm going to do is just make sure that we've got a texture coordinate, because I'm just going to adjust the mix right here. Let's run this out of object and just run into the first mix there. We'll set this at, we'll leave it at 0.5 actually. We'll set this first one at 80 and this second one at 80 as well. Let's just see what that looks like. So just kind of fuzz with you know, little bits of detail there. Our rocks are going to be quite small, so we want our pattern to be quite small as well. Then let's go ahead and open up the image editor like we did before, just by splitting our screen. And I'm going to load in a picture of a rock here. So I've got this granite texture in this window here. I'm just going to drag this over so it's in my image editor there, and then close this, and then come over to this color ramp here right before the rock principled BSDF, which should be plugged into color there. And I'm going to hit E while hovering over this spot here, and I can drag this across, get whatever texture I want, and once I'm happy with it, I can move on. I can do this as many times as I want, with a shorter one or a longer one. You know, it's up to you. Let's do that there, and then let's click back on this here, and let's close our window up. So now you've got some different colors for our rocks. It's quite dark. If that's the way you want it, that's fine. I think I had mine a little lighter in the original render, but this looks cool too. I'm going to come to a couple of these spots on the rock, the spots that are darker. Just makes these a little lighter. Just make my whole overall pattern a little lighter as well. There we go. I like the look of that a bit better. And since our node group is getting quite complicated too, let's start labeling things. Let's go ahead and grab these 4 top nodes, hit Control J, hit N to bring up the shelf, and this is going to be the mud color. Let's move that over here. Grab these 6 nodes right here, hit Control J. This is going to be the rock color. Move that up here. This right here is going to be the mud displacement. Move that up here. And this run right here is going to be the rock displacement. Then this one right here, this is the one that prevents those cracks from running through our rocks. So let's just call it crack exclusion maybe. I don't know, you can make up your own name for that. Not exclusion. There we go. And then let's name this guy here. This is the displacement control for the rocks. And then this one right here is the color separation for the rocks. So let's go ahead, name that. And there we go. Then this one right here, let's name this the amount of rocks. And now it's much better to look at already. Maybe let's just take this out with Alt P. Let's name this displacement shape. And this one as well. There we go. What I'd also like to do is make it so that there's certain spots in the mud, like where the cracks are, that it's a little darker. So we can use this right here, this Voronoi setup, to actually affect something right here. I'm going to create a mix RGB and just place it right before this principled BASDF in our mud color. And this mix right here, this color ramp right after that Voronoi, distance to edge one, we're going to bring this up and plug it right into this mix right here. Then we're going to bring in a hue saturation value and just place it right here. And this is going to run into color right here. And basically this one is also going to run into color 2 right there. And then we're going to just turn down this value to 0.6. So basically a darker version of this is just being put in those cracks there. Let's look at that again. It's not too much of a difference, but it is, you know, something. It just makes these a little darker in here. The last thing I did is I created a little bump map for the surface of this mud here. And to do that, let's bring in a noise, place it here, hit Control T, and let's basically set it up so that there is just 2 of these noises in a row and 2 mixes as well. Just put one right here and one afterwards as well. Whoops. There we go. So this is going to run into color 1. It's going to be into color 2. And this one's going to be into color 2 on this one here as well. So just make it so it looks like this here. And we're going to run this out of object. We're going to change this first noise, so the scale is 30. This first factor to 0.95. Second scale we'll leave at 5, and the second factor we'll change it to 0.825. So let's see what this is doing. It's creating a little bit of a bump map there. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix this with this exclusion map, because we don't want the bump on the rocks. So actually I'm just going to duplicate this guy here, and we're going to bring up this exclusion map here. Nope, not there. It's right here, and this is going to plug into the factor on this mix RGB right here. So if we see what that's doing, yeah, it's just basically masking out those spots where we have the rocks so that the same bump isn't on there. Let's create a bump node. Just place it right here. And this is going to run into the height. And we're going to turn the strength down to 0.3, the distance to 0.5. Let's plug this into the normal on this principled BSDF for our mud. And let's go ahead and look at the whole texture again. So yeah, now we can see the bump coming through. We can adjust that with these settings here. Nope. These settings here. And let's label this. We've got a new group. Let's go ahead and label that right here. Control J. And this is going to be our mud bump. There we go. I'm going to hit N to get rid of that shelf there. Let's bring in some HDRI lighting. I'm going to come here to the world properties and click this yellow circle next to color. Click environment texture and open, and just find where you got some HDRIs. Check out HDRI Haven if you don't have any. There are lots of free ones there. I'm just going to pick a random one here. We'll change it if it doesn't really work. Let's just see what that looks like. Come here to Ray Visibility and just click off Camera. And that'll allow this to still light your scene, but you won't be seeing the HDRI. And I just realized too, my light is still in this scene as well. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. Just going to go into Solid, just X that. Click these back on, or off rather, and go back into rendered mode. And yeah, I mean, it looks a little bright. We could either change the color of our stuff, or turn this down, or pick a completely different HDRI. Now we've got the lighting set up. I'm going to turn on these overlays for a second and just tab into edit mode. And then we can size this up, and we can just see the pattern gets larger around there too. So I'm just going to size this up a little bit there, tap back into object mode, and now we can see if we turn off these overlays, we've got our texture. So that's it. Hope you're able to follow along with everything, and if you weren't, feel free and ask me any questions, and I'll see what I can do to provide an answer. This is my first time combining displacements, and it was really tough at first, but also very satisfying once I finally got it. So I encourage you, if you're having any trouble doing something, just keep trying to push, try new things, and eventually you might break through and surprise yourself. Thanks for watching.